Hello and welcome to this special edition here on Global Eye as we mark 50 years of the Yom Kippur War. An intelligence Armageddon, a glorified military win, a decisive moment for decision-making, a forever bleeding wound in the nation's heart. It's been half a century since the 1973 war that changed Israel's course to a large extent. And 5 decades later, there is still no doubt it was a war like no other. But could there be another such war? Joining us on this special broadcast, retired Colonel Miri, former head of combat intelligence at the IDF, Major General in the reserves, Eitan Dangot, former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories, and national security expert, Colonel in the reserves, Mr. Kobi Marom. Thank you all so very much for joining us here today. We will keep some characteristics of Global Eye, and that will be the only one for today. We will begin with a quick fire round, 30 seconds each, to try and answer this question. Could there be another such war? Miri Eisen, please take the lead.
There can always be a similar war. There's never going to be the exact same one. So in that sense, I would say the answer, as I'm always complicated, a certain yes, but in a very different way.
Mr. Dangot.
I mostly agreed with Miri, but I can say that it can happen again, but according to the things that are happening today. And we have to be guarding the situation as it was like Yom Kippur, but we have to make it according to the present and the future situation.
I think even today, 50 years later, strategic surprise, it's an option. With Iran, who is the major enemy for Israel, and the proxies can happen within hours. I definitely think it's possible.
All right, gentlemen, from this point onwards, please feel free to interact, to engage in a conversation. But before we exercise your analytic muscles, even though that you're all a bunch of babies not fighting in the war, it is a very personal war to every Israeli. You know, in my self-determination, I'm a third generation to the Holocaust and a second generation to the Yom Kippur War. It runs in my veins to a large extent. So do please tell us where the war caught you, or how it accompanies you in your own personal journey before we again talk in hindsight about what this war was all about.
I was in 6th grade. We'd been in Israel for 2 years. I'm the little American girl from California, and the first time that I hear a siren. It's 2 p.m., Yom Kippur. We actually had services inside my parents' house, and we were in a break because it was 2 p.m. Within a few hours, even my dad, who had just done a little bit of basic training, was called up.
Wow.
So he was gone for 4 months. And again, I think that it's for every person, it's very personal. But for us, it was the North Americans caught in Israel in a horrific war. A few parents that were killed in the neighborhood. So you get to know that too at a very young age.
Being given the Israeli stamp very quickly.
Yeah, I was a child, 13 years old, after Bar Mitzvah, a month before, and I lived very close to the headquarters of the Kiryah, that were my area where I grew up. And on the main road, from the night, we pay attention that about military traffic. All the vehicles that were running to the Kiryah from Friday evening, it was, and during Saturday, we were sure something is happening. And the atmosphere was even before the alert, before the siren, that we know that something is happening. And when it was the siren, we were not surprised. But I remember the fright and the surprise, running to the synagogue to call my father, was called in his mission to his work that time. And the nights that we spent in the Yom Kippur, and the atmosphere was very bad. But I want to jump dramatically to 82. I joined the army in 78, end of 78. And in 82, I was in Beirut with the paratroopers. And when I'm thinking today about it, it's like in the military life, 2 years, it's like a generation.
Yeah.
It's 9 years, and I came to a war as a young commander of a battery that time, entered with the paratroopers, and I didn't feel any kind, of course, in my young age, something that brought the results of Yom Kippur. I saw the army so strong that time and so confident that time that it was like a generation from the time on years and not 9 years at all.
Yes.
I was 13 years old. I used to live in one of the Haifa suburbs. When the war started, I was in synagogue with my dad. And somebody opened the radio in the synagogue. You know, we didn't imagine in those tough hours about the terrible failures, the terrible surprise. And I was privileged in the morning after, when the reserve unit left their bases, just give them sandwiches and say hello and good luck in the battlefield. That's the beginning of the war for me.
Yes, and as we all know too well, the war might be over, but for so many and to a large extent, it's far from it. But okay, let's do stay in the past, but with a hindsight look and begin from maybe a point that you've made, Mr. Marom, the element of surprise here. This is something this is still a question that is being asked. Was it really a surprise, or was it vanity? Was it negligence? Why did Israel, passive tense, waited to be attacked?
First of all, I think, Ali, that the conflict in '73 was the toughest challenge that this country ever had. That's why I feel. And I think when we look 50 years ago, the major failure is the intelligence assessment that was totally wrong. I think that we saw everything along the border. We saw the tanks, we saw the cannons, we saw the activities of readiness for attack. And the head of the intelligence said that's an exercise. I think it comes from the point that we did not respect our enemies. We did not respect their leadership. We did not imagine that after the amazing victory of Six-Day War, they can think about and they have a will to fight Israel again.
Yeah.
And I think we did not understand the role of the national honor for the leadership of Egyptian and Syria. I think that Sadat said that he was ready to sacrifice 1 million soldiers to achieve his strategic goal and restore his national honor. And our leadership didn't understand that he is ready to pay those terrible prices just to restore their national honor, because we saw before the war that there is a lot of the Israeli leadership tried to negotiate with Sadat in many options, and didn't work out because he needs to initiate the war to tell his people we can make it.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
Vis-a-vis 67, and we'll dive further into whether war is the opposite of peace and vice versa necessarily. But Colonel Eisen, there was a somewhat of a fascinating simulation short years ago when they fed the same information, the same data that was collected the day before the war broke out to officers nowadays, and their answer was the same, that there will be no war. So my question to you is whether intelligence is about collecting data or about analyzing it?
Ali, isn't it funny when we think about intelligence, it's the know-it-all. We know everything.
Maybe we don't know what we know.
Intelligence gathers an immense amount of information. It always has, and today the challenge is way bigger and stronger. In 1973, there was a ton of information. I'm going to give a horrible additional example of having all of the information and not understanding it clearly, and that's 9/11 in 2001, where there was a ton of information, but if you're looking at it in a certain way, Ali, we're human beings, and we're still not AI-generated intelligence assessments. And that means that as people, we look at things through our eyes, through our understanding, through the way that we view the arena. And there's no question that the outlook, certainly of the top generals, certainly, as mentioned before by Kobi Marom, the head of military intelligence, who viewed Egypt, I even want to say, in a slightly patronizing way, in the sense that they haven't recovered yet. We don't have to worry about it. And I say that today because to me that's one of those big challenges today. That state of mind is a state of mind. It has nothing to do with your better collection capabilities or having better people. It has to do with how you
We
view
sometimes
it.
just look at information in a bid to reassure our own perception. We're taking a short break, but continuing from that point exactly 2 minutes, and we're back. Welcome back to this special edition as we mark 50 years to the Yom Kippur War that changed not just the course of Israel, but of the Middle East altogether. And still with us here in studio, Colonel Miri, Major General Eitan Dangot, and Colonel Kobi Marom. Thank you all very much for staying with us. Mr. Dangot, 5 decades later, can we say clearly who won and who lost?
I think that if you analyze each side claim or direction is that the beginning was terrible, of course, for Israel, the disaster, and later on we succeed to push them back and bring back the deterrence towards Israel and others. But in my opinion, nowadays, when you are far away from 50 years already passed, and I'm listening or reading now in my age with my experience, I may say that I think that Israel should look at it at its second independent celebration of the establishment of the country, because what happened here, it's like a miracle, and it shows a lot exactly when we are talking today. The stories about the soldiers, the commanders in the field, how they made this war, with all the mistakes they got from the senior officers or from the the dialogue that was with the military high senior commanders, with the policy of with the government, I think that there was here a miracle, but it showed the strongness of this country, especially these days. And it's something that I compare it later on to other wars, and I'm happy for it that we didn't face a thing like that. Secondly, I may tell you that if I'm looking today, you ask about being surprised, about intelligence. You have to take things in balance. Intelligence is not a Bible. Intelligence officers has no responsibility for operating, and sometimes they are missing points because they are analyzing like they are sitting in the room and telling you yes or no, but at the end you need the tense between the operational wing and the intelligence wing as well. I think it's a great lesson to give everybody that has a contact to a subject like this in the intelligence field to talk, to raise their things, and not to close mouth, and not to be afraid to talk. Even you are a young officer or a senior officer, you have to discuss the thing in this point.
Ellie, I think that we had, regarding your question, an amazing victory, because if you look to the point that we started this war, the Syrians almost occupied the majority of the Golan Heights, across the Suez Canal. And in the end of the day, we were 40 kilometers from Damascus and 100 kilometers from Cairo. It's unbelievable. I think the IDF, and when we emphasize the failure of the leadership at the head of the intelligence, on the other hand, in the battlefield, we have the commanders that actually sacrificed their life and stopped the enemy. And regarding to the question about the surprise, even today, I think the real challenge for the intelligence is to know, we got a lot of information, to know the enemy intentions. That's the real challenge. Where are they going to go? And I would like to emphasize another two failures that I think when we look 50 years later. One is the operating of the Israeli aircraft during the war. I think it was clear in the beginning of the conflict that we have to achieve immediately air superiority. And unfortunately, we failed to achieve the air superiority, and we did not destroy the anti-air batteries. Also, that's the reason why we lost so many aircraft and so many pilots. Number two, the Israeli intelligence did not identify the convoys from Iraq to the battlefield. You know, they traveled for 10 days, the Iraqis troop, and we could attack them on their way to the battlefield. And by the way, that's the reason why the IDF stopped his attack to Damascus, because we had the Iraqis Iraqis brigades that we could attack them much earlier, and they actually stopped the IDF. So,
Ali, we just heard two commanders. The intel officer is going to step in for a moment, because here we are 50 years later, and intelligence, to me, almost always, certainly in these kind of things, has that potential for failure. This was an enormous intelligence failure. Now, it wasn't at all levels, but that's, to my own degree, even worse. Why is that even worse? Because young officers down near the different areas, and they tried to cry out, and they wanted to do things, and some of the commanders made decisions based on that. But the overall concept, the word that we haven't yet said here, that concept, at the end muted a lot of the voices. And I'm always worried when we look at that failure, because we fight the war that we fought. And our challenge is to fight the next war. And if we're looking at 50 years after the Yom Kippur War, that's not going to be the scenario of the next war. But you can still have all of the same elements of seeing things, not understanding them, putting them into your own context. And in that sense, I think that we had an enormous strategic failure, an amazing operational and tactical victory like no other, as both of them said before. But if I look at the lessons learned, I'm still worried.
And I want to add something concerning what Kobi said, but I want to bring another point of view, because it was a great challenge, the thing that happened here. But on the other end, we lost more than 2,000 people. And 2,000 people were lost because, I think, in many fields, Air Force, anti-Air Force tactic activities by the other side, we were not prepared ourselves to the changes at all. And don't forget, 67 to 73 was 6 years only, 7 years. And you have in the middle another war, when we were on the lines, where were all the concept of studying, of improving it? And when you're talking today, I agreed, we have to be very careful not to be prepared to what we know from the past for the future. And I give you example. Tomorrow morning, if Hezbollah are deciding to do something, that is the reason to take seriously everywhere that you hear from the other side, and then can surprise or try to attack two villages that close to the border and try to achieve something in 4 hours. Where we will be and whether we are prepared to such activities and prepared yourself. This is something of surprise that you have to attempt it to the present situation, and we have on this field very sensitive threats towards Israel that can find us and say, hey, we can be surprised.
I think today the situation is totally different. The enemy is different. And the lesson that I think we should learn is the readiness of the IDF should be immediate readiness. Because the challenge is immediate. What?
Is it ready, the IDF
I
nowadays?
think we have to improve it. First of all, to understand we are facing a trouble with the readiness of the Air Force right now. So I think the lesson that we have learned, that with the challenges all over that Iran is leading today, the readiness of the IDF should be much better, because we may face another surprise with the Iranians attack with a proxy all over the Middle East. It can happen.
So to the question whether Israel can be, quote unquote, surprised again,
I think
the answer is yes?
I think it's possible. I think it's
Absolutely.
Anybody can be surprised again. None of us are with that know-it-all, what's that going to be, the crystal ball that tells us what's going to happen. But when you say it in those terms, it's like it's either or. There are a lot of different levels of surprise, because the preparedness that Kobi's talking about is something that you can act on in an immediate way. Ali, are the citizens of the State of Israel ready for a surprise attack? That's a whole different level of how you prepare people for something like that. So we talk a lot today about the future challenges, that they've changed so much. But in its own way, I want to add in one additional aspect, that the over 2,000, I think it was 2,200 casualties, men killed, mainly men, in the 1973 war, that was over a period of 3 weeks.
Yeah.
In a country that was 3 million people. And just think of what that did within a country. And in Israel, we have a tendency of the stiff upper lip, and we'll get past it. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing today is also 50 years of PTSD. And in that sense, that's also part of the surprise and what happens and how are we going to withstand it as individuals, not just as the military.
As a daughter of a soldier at the Yom Kippur
By the way,
War,
in the
I
last
can tell
2
you that only now do we begin to realize the depth of how the war continues to resonate. I was just telling my producers earlier that no matter what conversations you begin, in a matter of 3 sentences, you're back in the battlefield. And it is the situation of so many
When
here.
we talk about surprise, by the way, Ali, in the last 2 decades, we had 2 incidents that we had. One is the nuclear reactor in Syria in 2007, and the Hezbollah tunnels that were discovered and destroyed 5 years ago. So for a while, the Israeli intelligence did not know what's going on. It took a while. So that's kind of strategic surprise that can happen even today.
All right, we'll do a very sharp segue to today, because the Yom Kippur War was not once, not twice dubbed as the last no-choice war Israel had. And in the context of, in the spirit of normalizations that are now being felt here in the region, is peace necessarily the opposite of war, and is war necessarily the opposite of peace? Miri Eisen.
I don't use the word peace, Ellie. I use the word resolution.
Resolution.
Yeah,
As
we have
in?
wonderful agreements and resolutions. Peace is something else. And I'm saying it in a very realpolitik way, meaning things can change. But that doesn't mean that you don't arrive at those peace treaties, resolutions. You try to change people and how they look at things.
And the room temperature peace with Egypt, let's put it that way,
I think
is
that-
perhaps a...
Is that not one of the most amazing things that we don't put into perspective? That all of 5 years, you talked about the 1982, already being a young officer, and I'm like, I remember very clearly sitting in my parents' home in 1977 and watching the plane of Sadat open up, and this is that same Sadat, that was in 77. The war was in 73, that was 4 years later. So that by the way, was also a strategic surprise for intelligence. We did not foresee that.
So, just to continue, the key point for what you call the peace is timetable. Stop opportunity for a war on one end, on the other end, develop any kind of middle mechanism to relax and wait for opportunities that you can translate it to much more better. Who could expect that on 2021 will be Abraham Agreement, while we have been 10 years before on the Arab Revolution that we spent? Who can expect to what Iran will come these days, 2023, with all the statements that were said by leaders? With the Palestinians, for a last job in the IDF, I support the very simple sentence. For example, economy is security and security is economy. Look what happened while Israel succeeded to find out all the amount of gas opportunities in the Mediterranean. Could you imagine that Erdogan will come to Israel to ask
for
to renew the relationship? So give the timetable between a war and between a full peace. You have many opportunities.
I don't think there is any threat for the existence of Israel today. But the enemy today, the terror organization all over, Hamas and the Hezbollah and the Iranians, create different challenges. And the threat for the Israeli people today is much tougher than it used to be 50 years ago. And I think what we're gonna see right now, the normalization with the Saudis, with the United States, can change the whole situation, deter Iran. So, but the bottom line, I think there is the whole justification for us to defend the people of Sderot and Kiryat Shmona, even today with the challenges across the border.
Well, it feels so often that, in the political sphere, where reality is merely the time between one election round to the other. To an extent, in the experience of Israel, time is also between war to war. Hopefully it will change from peace to peace. Thank you all so very much for this. Another break. We're back in a bit.